This is the Danger Close podcast, Beyond the Books with me, Jack Carr. Welcome to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by 6 Hour. My guest today is Michael Easter. Michael is a journalist and author and professor of journalism at UNLV. That's Las Vegas. He's written a book called The Comfort Crisis, which is something I've thought about quite a bit over the course of my life, about the importance of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, which is something we talk about in the SEAL teams, and the importance of facing adversity, making that a part of your life, building on the lessons that you learn, because you're going to get knocked down in life for sure. And if you make it too far without getting knocked down, you're not going to be able to deal with it quite as well. So Comfort Crisis, amazing book, had a fantastic time talking to him. And now, without further ado, Michael Easter. Hey, Michael, what's happening?
We made it happen. How are you,
We made
man?
it happen. Thank you so much for your patience and for switching things around. I sincerely appreciate it, man.
No worries. How was last week?
Oh, let's see. What was last week? Oh, Pearl Harbor. That was, man, it was such a moving experience. More so for my daughter. So she's 16 and it was a perfect time in her life to go out there because, you know, the farther we get from that time, there's less touch points with people that were there or people that did that, fought in World War II and had grew up in the Depression. So, which ties right into your book, going through this adversity and having hard times and being uncomfortable. So she got to talk to and they loved her because they're so much older, and a lot of the people volunteering are like, my age, maybe a little younger, a few a little older, but there wasn't anybody that was in their teens, and so she's the only teenager, and for them to have this connection with a younger person was just so special for her and for them. And so it was, I think it changed her life. I think it really changed her life. Yeah. But a lot of it is exactly because of what you're researching in the book. And a lot of that is because, today, like, she has not had that many uncomfortable type of experience, like going out in the wilderness, like we go hunting and stuff together. We do that, but, and she's gone to these, month-long camps that have taken her into the Grand Tetons and that sort of a thing.
Dude, she's miles above everyone else. Great. I mean,
so she had a couple of touch points there, but then to talk to people that it wasn't like, in the 30s, their parents were paying for them to go on an outward bound experience. It's like, oh no, you need to go and kill that rabbit and bring it back so that we can eat and survive here. As your father's going door to door, maybe selling pencils or whatever it is. So so it's a little different. Like they have to do that to survive, and it really forged obviously that generation that won World War II and then gave us all the freedoms we have today. So I think she became a lot more appreciative over the course of our week back there, because it wasn't one day. That was also what was important. It was a week of events out there and getting them in their wheelchairs, out of their wheelchairs, onto the bus, out of the bus, to all these different events and ceremonies and that sort of thing. So it was special, man. It was really cool.
I mean, it's so crazy how that whole generation mobilized. I mean, could you imagine, like, think of, I'm a professor at a university here, and it's like, I don't know. It's a strange time, but I think like that generation, like you're literally 18 years old, Pearl Harbor happens. It's like, all right, we're going. And it's just like, that's just what you did, it's wild. Very cool.
And a lot of these guys, they lied about their age. So we had 63 veterans out there from World War II. We had 6 that were at Pearl Harbor, but others were 12 when Pearl Harbor happened. And then they got to 15 and lied to get in. And back then, they couldn't check as easily as they can today. So they're like, oh, you have this signed note from your parent who might be like a sibling who's 1 year older than you. Okay, you're in off to basic training and then into the war. So some of these guys, it was amazing. So our youngest was 96 and our oldest was 104. And we had everything in between. And they were all totally with it, which was amazing. Obviously the bodies are starting to deteriorate a little bit, but their minds were there, which was pretty cool. So maybe it's like after you hit a certain point, maybe after you hit like 90 or something, like you've got it till the end. I don't know, but for this group anyway, this particular 63 people, they were totally with it. They got frustrated because they couldn't hear sometimes. So that's an issue you have to be aware of. But man, they were all with it, and they were sharing stories and it was incredible, just incredible. But that whole generation, you're right. they experienced discomfort, and it was a part of life. And and that's why I love when I saw that this book came out, The Comfort Crisis. I was like, I mean, there were two things that went through my mind. One was like, oh, awesome. I think about this. I've been thinking about these things my entire life. But the other part was, oh man, it's a little sad that we need a book like this today. Because it was just, okay, that's just life for all of human history up until a little while ago. And it was not too long ago where we had to actually think about those things and be like, oh, okay, to move forward as a productive human being. And I'm going to have to experience a little discomfort here. Now we have to, in a lot of cases, put ourselves into those so that we're ready when they actually happen. So we're ready when those situations come. But I want to talk to you about like how you got to this point. You're a professor of journalism at UNLV. So what was your path into journalism and into academia before you had the idea to write this book? What was that journey like that got you in front of the classroom?
Yeah, so I actually was a editor at Men's Health, a writer and editor at Men's Health magazine for a bunch of years, and so I'd been a magazine writer. I did stuff for other magazines. I was at Esquire for a little while. Had sort of written for all the dude magazines. Did a lot of science writing as well. So did stuff for Scientific American. And at a certain point in the magazine world, you stop writing quite as much and you have to start editing. They start asking you questions like, can you please, figure out the future of journalism for us and how we're going to make money from this thing? And that's not what I was interested in, right? I wanted to write. And so basically what happened is I thought, okay, I'd kind of been interested in teaching at a university because if you're in the journalism department, half your job is teaching and the other half is writing, right? So I was like, okay, I could kind of have this free license to write, teach some classes, hang out with young people. And a job opened up at UNLV, and my wife and I had oddly wanted to move to Las Vegas. And so I took it, and now I'm here.
No kidding. It doesn't look like you could have done all this by this. I mean, you look very young. That's what when I saw what you looked like for the first time. I forget if it was in the book jacket or social media or whatever. I'm like, this guy like 25 years old. How's he doing all of this? How's your professor?
I'm
how
57.
old are you? How old are you?
57.
Stop it.
57? No, I'm just kidding. I'm 35.
I was like 10 years off. But so what inspired you to want to write in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that I grew up in a house that had a lot of books. My mom is like a voracious reader. My dad was never around, but my mom, we always had books around. And I think I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and I read Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. And it was just like, that book just hooked me. Like, that was it. I was like, oh my God, you could go on an adventure. And that one turned out bad, but you could go on an adventure and write about it. Like, wow, that seems cool. And I'd always been a magazine junkie, like always. Had a bunch of subscriptions to magazines as a kid. And but when I got to college, like for whatever reason, it never occurred to me, yeah, maybe you could do that for a living. Like it just didn't. So in college, I had studied, I had done this major that was kind of a mix of environmental science and international relations. And what I wanted to do with that, I was like, I guess I could get a law degree, a business degree, I'll go work for like an oil company or something like that. Like, I didn't know. But then I took this class when I was a junior, when it was too late to change my major. There was an environmental writing class. So basically we just had to write about environmental stuff. So, we'd read like Thoreau, we'd read Edward Abbey, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. And we would do our own kind of stories like that. And I just enjoyed the hell out of it. I was like, this is awesome. I had fun doing it. I was halfway decent at it, which I gauged because, people in class would read my stuff and they would laugh, or they'd be like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And so from there, I actually graduated college the year of the financial collapse. So my class's option was either go live in your mom's basement and take some random job that if you could find one, or go to grad school. So I went to grad school because I didn't really have I knew I wanted to be a writer, but there was nothing on my resume that indicated that I could ever do a job in writing. So I went to grad school for journalism, and that was in New York City. And that just sort of led me into the path of magazines and writing.
Nice. Yeah. I think having that foundation built as a reader, in my case, as a fan of a particular genre, it sets you up much better, I guess, than just waking up one day and saying, hey, I think I'm going to do this. I'll go to school for it. But having grown up, diving into the pages of Newsweek and Time and our local paper and New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and then reading all these guys like David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and AJ Quinnell and JC Pollock and Tom Clancy and all these guys growing up, and then finding out things from there, like, oh, what is this about Israel over here? I want to find out more about that. And then doing the research. But I was also encouraged. My mom was a librarian, still is a librarian. So we grew up with this love of reading and books, and my dad encouraged reading, and it was just a normal part of our life. It wasn't. That's where I feel like I failed as a parent. I've made it, and I thought I was reading to the kids from the day they were home. Like I was there, just like my parents were. I was reading every single night to them, even when they're in their crib, all the way up until they got too old to want me to keep reading to them anymore. But now it's like, hey, it's time to go read. But it wasn't like that in our house. It was just like normal. It was like eating breakfast or having dinner together. Reading was just a part of it. It was so natural. It wasn't like this thing you had to do. I tried to do that, but I don't think I did a very good job. So I'm thinking that our kids are their path into reading might be through like audiobooks or something like that, just because they're so connected to these devices. And that's the fastest growing segment of publishing anyway, is the audio side. So I think that might be their path, or at least I'm hoping, because once again, like, not just like we talked about the World War II generation and going through to the Depression. Well, I had touch points with them because of my grandparents, and I got to talk to them about the Depression and what they did in World War II and that sort of thing. My grandfather was killed in World War II off Okinawa in 1945. Oh, wow. But I was also reading about all these things, reading about other people's experience, other people's adversity, reading endurance, about Shackleton, like reading all these books that that became a part of me, essentially. So when I was doing something like cross-country running or getting into boxing or whatever, and in the ring, whatever it was, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm not storming the beaches at Normandy or going over the beach at Iwo Jima, or I'm not, on an ice floe, eating my shoe leather to survive. This isn't that bad. I can run another mile, or in buds, I can do a few more push-ups here in SEAL training, or whatever it might be. But a lot of that came from reading. So the preparation for life wasn't just getting in the boxing ring or getting on the mat in jiu-jitsu or running cross country or playing lacrosse or whatever it was, or putting on a backpack and heading into the Sierras. It was reading. And I loved reading books by journalists. I mean, because they had already had this background. They had seen so much and written about so many different things that they had options about what they wanted to write about. So they got to choose something, I found, that they were passionate about, which is kind of what you did. So I remember there was a book in high school called, I think it was called Down the Amazon. It's like my shelves over here, they go 3 deep. So I have to like dig a little bit, and I've kept these books for so long. But, he went down the Amazon in like a kayak, and he was, I think he was a reporter for a newspaper in Northern California, but came back and wrote about it. Awesome book. Heard him talk, I think at REI, back when I was in high school. But yeah, you get to choose what you want and are passionate about, which was so cool about this as well. So how did this come about then? So you're already a professor at UNLV. You've already worked at Esquire and these different magazines, and you get to choose what you want to write about, essentially, what you want to devote a number of years to, however many it might be. But you get to figure out, hey, why do I want to do this? And you get to choose something you're passionate about. So how did this come about? What was that decision to write about this?
So the short answer is that, through personal experience and through my career, writing about health, my entire career, specifically lifestyle health. So I don't typically write about what happens in the doctor's office, right? I'm writing about like things a person can do to improve their health. And when you look at that, every single thing that you can do to improve your life, it usually comes with some form of discomfort, right? If I want to improve my fitness, I have to exercise. Exercise is hard. It's uncomfortable. If I want to lose weight, I'm probably going to be hungry, right? But even things like improving your mental health, usually you have to unpeel a few onions that maybe you don't want to unpeel, right? A couple layers there. And so I kind of made that observation, right? And then I ended up doing a piece for Men's Health where I went on a backcountry hunt with Donnie Vincent for, I think we were like 5 days. And so it's not super long, but we went up, it was in Nevada, up in the mountains. And that sort of exposed me to like, it's cold the entire time. I'm hungry the entire time. I'm bored most of the time. Anything I do up there, it takes effort, right? And it was like, oh, I'd made this observation that, discomfort usually improves your life. And then I go out into this world that is more uncomfortable, right? And I come back and I just feel like better in every way. And it was also a wake up call to like, once you go from extended time in the mountains to you're back home, you can see like, oh my God, the world has become unbelievably comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like think about what most influences the average person's daily life, right? We wake up in soft beds, in temperature control, food is in the refrigerator, we don't have to work for it. Our work is no longer physical, it's often behind a screen, it's more mental. On and on and on, right? We're never bored anymore because we've got all these distraction devices. So it's just like I got really fascinated in that change because ultimately I'm trained as like a science journalist, right? But I'm also a person who I like to tell a narrative behind what I'm talking about. So Donnie invited me up to the Arctic for more than a month on a long hunt, and I just thought, man, that could serve as an overarching narrative to really dive into effectively the science of what are the benefits of discomfort and what are the downsides of how comfortable our world has become. And so that's effectively what the book is.
So I remember when Donnie did that, he posted about it or told me about it. He's such a great guy. Donnie Vincent, his films are amazing. Just such an interesting human being and just a great guy. So I remember when he did that, but you talk about rites of passage in the book, and it's such an important thing. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to military service today, because they're looking for that rite of passage, whether they know it or not. It might be just this innate thing that's programmed into us as humans because it's been part of our evolution. So whether you know it or not, picking out special operations, whichever one, is because whether you know it or not, that's a challenge. And that this is a rite of passage, and you're welcomed into a brotherhood of warriors afterward. You emerge transformed at the other end of this test. So in here, there's so many great things you write about in here, but there's rites of passage. The first is separation. The person exits the society in which they live and ventures into the wild. The second is transition. The person enters a challenging middle ground where they battle with nature and their mind telling them to quit. The third is incorporation. The person completes the challenge and re-enters their normal life, an improved person. It's an exploration and expansion of the edge of a person's comfort zone. And then you talk about rites of passage that still exist in a few cultures. You talk about the Dutch here in this first chapter, but there are very few rites of passage these days. You have to seek them these days, it seems. And you talk about this helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting. And I hadn't heard snowplow parenting until you mentioned it, but I see it, and I've probably been guilty of it myself at times. Even though I try to get the kids into uncomfortable positions and get them outside, get them out hunting, get them out feeling cold, appreciate these things that we have at home. All those things you just mentioned, the soft bed and the food in the fridge, and appreciating where that comes from, and all of that. And actually, the history of Outward Bound. And you talk about Outward Bound in the book a little bit, but I was fortunate enough to be able to do that as a kid as well, and loved the solo part of it. By the way, being out there for however long it was 24 hours or 2 days. I can't remember. Maybe it was 3 even. But I did a NOLS course later, a semester in Alaska, and that was a little longer time. But I loved it. I've always loved being alone, and I've never felt bored my entire life, because I think when I've been bored, then I get to think and daydream, meaning that I'm not bored anymore. And as a writer, especially in fiction, daydreaming is an important thing, and not just to all of a sudden do it one day, but to have that just be a normal part of your life, taking time to be quiet, not having all these digital distractions. And it's just such a healthy thing to do, which you mentioned in the book here. But in talking about boredom, I mean, we're all dealing with the social dilemma, and we're dealing with smartphones for us and for our kids, a generation that is now growing up with these things. Whereas for a lot of us, it came a little later. What did you take away from that, from the importance of being bored, and then these digital distractions that keep us from having this time to ourselves?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story about that. So when we're up in the Arctic, we're hunting this herd of caribou, and so we're effectively waiting on them to move through. Now, they weren't coming, right? So we're sitting on this hill for hours and hours a day with nothing to do, because my cell phone doesn't work up there. I didn't bring a book. I didn't bring a magazine. I didn't bring a computer. I didn't bring an iPad, on and on and on, right? So I found myself bored again. right? It's like, so then what do I do? So we start reading the labels on all the food we brought. We start reading the tags on our jackets, on our gear. I start doing a ton of push-ups, right? But then I started thinking of ideas for the magazines I write for. Came up with 17 different story ideas. All of them were good. I started writing some of the book. So I told you that to basically tell you this, and that is that boredom is an evolutionary discomfort that we evolved to face. And it would kick on anytime whatever we were doing, we weren't getting a good return on our time anymore. So if we need food or else we're going to starve and we're hunting and there's nothing to hunt, boredom kicks on and goes, go do something else, right? So then we go pick potatoes or pick berries or whatever. So boredom is effectively this cue, this discomfort that says, go do something else with your time, right? Find something else to do. And it often puts us into a sort of mind wandering phase where we come up with ideas and things like that. And in the book now, I argue that boredom is effectively dead because we have all these really easy, effortless ways to deal with that discomfort. That is mainly from all the devices in our life. So you look at the average person, they spend more than 12 hours a day engaging with digital media. So that's from all different formats, right? Like cell phone, TV screen, computer screen, iPad, everything. But we also know that boredom can be good for us because one, you look at the research on boredom and creativity, and boredom is really good at helping people come up with creative ideas. They do these tests where they will, these studies where they will get one group and they'll let them do whatever they want to do. They usually just hang out on their cell phone. And then they'll get another group and they bore the living heck out of them. And then they give them a creativity test. And the people who are in the bored group always come up with more creative answers. And that's because boredom gives you this time inward for your mind to wander, as you just sort of alluded to. And it's in that phase where your mind is wandering. It's almost kind of like scan on a radio. It's going through all these like weird little things, and you kind of land on something that's like new and intriguing, something that isn't coming at you on Instagram that's like, the fifth post you've seen of a dog that day or whatever. No, not hating on dog posts. I do them all the time, but I'm arguing that we spend maybe a little too much time engaged with digital media today and need to reinsert boredom back into our lives.
Yeah, I wonder every now and again what the world would look like if we had social media and we had these platforms, we had these digital distractions, let's say, during or after the Civil War in this country. During the Civil War, how would that have been weaponized to continue to divide the country when we needed to heal? What if Einstein had it early on, social media, scanning through that? What if Sir Isaac Newton? What if Benjamin Franklin? Anyway, I think about that, how different the world would look had social media shown up 10 years earlier, 20 years earlier, 100 years earlier, 200 years earlier. And I don't think the outcomes are very good. And you're right. You're actually right about that in here. And I love this one. I hadn't thought about it in this way today, but of course we all heard of these Silicon Valley tech executives not allowing their children to have phones and social media platforms because they're well aware of the dangers, and not just danger. That's like a too easy of a word to use, but just how unhealthy it is for our mental well-being to be tied to these devices, constantly comparing ourselves to others who are obviously taking one snapshot, and essentially their marketing is what they're doing, whether it's personal or professional, where you're selling something or you're just posting a picture of your family. There's a reason that you're doing both of those things, and both of them are tied to marketing. But you write this, and you say, picture yourself at Target, Costco, or any retail store. You take a product to the checkout counter and hand it to the clerk. She rings you up. Then she points to your purchase, locks eyes with you, and whispers gravely, I am convinced the devil lives in this. Would you, A, assume this was the beginning of a real-life horror film in which you were the main character, or B, buy the product and use it for hours each day? Apparently, we all go with B. And I was like, oh, man, that nailed it, as they say. But no time alone is not that healthy. Like yesterday, I was editing all day my fifth novel, and so I took my phone and it went in a separate room. It's just easier not to have it within sight. Goes near there. I don't hear it buzz inadvertently if I forgot to put it on airplane mode or whatever. It's in another room. And I have another computer that's only for writing. It's not my regular one. And the only reason that other computer is connected is so that I can then send it to my other computer to then send on to Simon and Schuster. And so it gets updates to, to whatever it needs to update, but I don't use it for anything else but writing.
There's no browser or anything on it, like internet browser?
There is, but there's that's just because I need to do some updates through that, I think, for Word, I think. Anyway, I'd rather not have that on there at all. And I think someone does make a computer now, but it looks like almost 1980s technology. It's like a small screen, and but it just allows you to write. There's nothing else. You can't put anything else on it. But for me, the screen's not quite right yet. But at some point I'll probably do something like that as well. In the new house, I have a whole nother room just for writing, one just for reading, another one it's nice to be able to have that. I haven't had that luxury up to now, but I see, because social platforms are really like my storefront, essentially. And then it's also a way for me to thank people, because if you were an author in 1985, the only time you got to thank someone is at a book signing when you shook their hand and said, thank you so much. Well, now I can thank people. I could do it through these social platforms. So I try to use it in a way that's positive, but it's still a digital distraction, and it's still taking time away from me thinking of being alone. But people have talked about it before, that tribe. What was a natural number of people to have in your circle? And it was 150 type people was like the
100
max?
About 150 max is about the number of people that the human brain can process, because that's what happens once our tribes get over 150 people is now all of a sudden we not only need to remember all the names and faces, but we also need to remember the complex social relationships between those people, right? It's like, oh yeah, Emily hates Jane, so I can't have those two together. Once you get over 150, it just starts to sort of throw us off a little bit. It becomes a lot harder to manage, and that seems to be stressful for the human brain.
It is. I feel it. And I know, and I tried to keep the people I follow on social, particularly Instagram, at 300. I was like, I'm going to keep it at 300. But then I saw how happy it made people when I followed them back. And I'm like, and something I try to tell my kids is like, hey, never miss an opportunity to make somebody's day. Like I try to do that. I try to live that way. The simple act of following someone who does something nice for me, like posting the book and saying how much they liked it, like that sort of a thing. So I follow a lot more, but I've also noticed that the anxiety and stress that comes along with managing some of that, even if it's not really managing, it's just on a feed. So it sounds so strange to have it cause a little bit of anxiety, but it does for whatever reason. So it's obviously so important.
And I'm with you on the right. Like I've had a lot of great, I've met awesome people on social media. Right. I think for me, and as you were kind of talking about before, it's really, is my cell phone and all these other screens distracting me from my main goal, which is to write. So like you said, you put your phone in the other room. I do the same. I also, because I write on a computer that has, and I'll have to pull research, from the internet. But if all of a sudden I find myself oh, I somehow ended up on Twitter when I was supposed to be looking at the study. I have this thing I'm going to show you because it's at my desk all the time. It's a clicker. So this is the same type of thing that you would click to get people into a concert venue. Every time I get distracted, I click.
Oh, wow.
And so then I can track that over time because there's this auditory feedback. And I've noticed that by doing that, my distraction level has gone down over time.
No way. I'm going to do that. I'm getting a clicker. Just because I do have that internet browser on there. And sometimes I'm doing research and you're not supposed, people say, don't edit as you write. Well, I do. I edit as I write just because in my mind, if I continue forward, I have this little bit of bandwidth that in the back of my head is like, hey, that last chapter, it needs a little work. You need to go back and fix this because if you go too much farther, you don't know how what you write back then and what research you do for this, even if it's just a paragraph, are going to affect what happens here in the future. And so I'm like, click. Okay, let's look this up. And then, I need to watch a video on YouTube. So but then it feeds me what it knows that I like. I'm like, oh, awesome. James Bond, best movie lines, whatever it is, they know me. I'm like, oh, awesome. A cool off-road truck, whatever. They know me. They got the data, which is another thing that, the most value in part of this book was this fifth one, is really about quantum computing and about how much information is out there, the value of data, who controls that data, how maybe this started by wanting to advertise, particularly to tailor that. But what this has turned into is, that's profitable, of course, because we have some of the most wealthy people in the world are making money from this. But what they've also found is that this data doesn't just make them extremely wealthy, but now it allows them to control behaviors. So
Yeah.
it's much more powerful than just having that bank account and being able to fund what you'd like to fund. I mean, but doing that research, having that browser open had definitely led me down a few rabbit holes. So I do have that open, but I'm gonna use the clicker. That's a great idea. Definitely gonna use that clicker. It's awesome. And you also write about stress and memory. And I really like when you talked about this because it's true. And people who have experienced stressful situations or been in life-threatening situations in the mountains or wherever else, you remember that. And that becomes part of your foundation moving forward to make you better able to deal with those types of situations in the future and increase survivability, and then pass those lessons on, hopefully to your children, the next generation, that sort of thing. But let's see, you write, I spoke with Douglas Fields, one of the country's leading neuroscientists. He's a senior investigator at the National Institute of Health and runs their department on neurocryptology. Is that right?
Neurocytology, I think it is.
Which is the study of neurons. He told me that when you undergo a new stressful experience, you're transferring short-term memories into long-term memories. What just happened to you, what it led to, and what you should do next time you face a similar situation. In general, this is because memory is about the future. We retain experiences that may be of survival value at another time. And yes, I mean, then you don't have those types of experiences. Then you run into them later in life, and maybe you're responsible for more than just yourself at that point. And so it's adversely affecting those around you if you do not have these kind of experiences earlier on in life. That one. So, and you talk about failure, what it was for most of human history, what that meant, like dying, and then what it means today. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you think about as humans evolved, right, we would have to do challenging things in nature all the time. I mean, this was part of living, right? So this could be from, a big hunt. This could be from having to move from summering to wintering grounds. This could be from like a tiger lurking in the bushes, right? And each time that we would complete one of those challenges, we would learn something about ourselves, right? Because failure often meant death from these challenges, and we would be thrust into them naturally. And as we would do them, we would learn what we were capable of, right? But today, we don't really have those challenges anymore, right? So for the average person, like what is really a challenging thing that comes with a high risk of failure is usually, something that happens in the office. Like, I got to give a talk in front of people, which don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's not stressful for people, but I'm saying it's kind of a different stress and the stakes are a lot lower. So by not being put in positions where we could potentially fail, we also never really have to dig deep and get to a point where we realize what we are capable of, right? We're never put in a position where it's like, oh man, like I didn't know if I could really do this. And I had to figure out my stuff, dig deep, and like, wow, I'm more capable than I thought I was. And then once you learn that, you can carry that into your everyday life. And it sort of just expands your potential as a human. So without being tested, we just never know what we're capable of. And we also know that not having a lot of challenge in your life can lead to some ill mental health impacts. So when you look at people who have had challenges in their life, people who have had like the most, trauma and challenges, like just so many, just thing after thing, they don't have good mental health. But on the flip side, people who have no challenges have equally bad mental health, right? So there is sort of a sweet spot where having enough challenge in your life, but not way too much, it makes you more mentally resilient, psychologically resilient. You're capable of doing things. You can handle it. It's not overwhelming. And I think more and more today, we're kind of erring on the side of just not enough because it makes sense. Like you don't want to do hard things, right? But we know that hard things is how people grow.
Yep. Yeah, but that get comfortable being uncomfortable in the SEAL teams, and I thought about that well before I ever joined the military. And also knowing your capabilities and your limitations; these things all help us understand both, and it is important to understand your limitations as well, so you can work on them or whatever. You're important to be aware of them. But we've also equated, like you said, that PowerPoint presentation you need to give the boss or the room full of executives or whatever with what 300 years ago might have been death. And now we've like equated these things because that's our stress. That's what we know. It's not, going out in the wilderness and dealing with a crazy storm that comes in when you have to hunt something to bring it back to your family or whatever it might be. Well, now it's that PowerPoint presentation, but that level of stress is commensurate, which is not healthy, and also shows the importance of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations earlier in life, so that you're like, I can go give this brief, and hey, you know what? If I mess it up, hey, it's not the end of the world. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'll learn from it and move forward.
I think those types of experiences can reframe fear for us. It's like if you're only exposed to sort of the more trivial things in life, it's like your body is going to fear those like they're a real threat. Yeah. But if you put yourself in a position where there actually is some real danger involved, I think that it can sort of almost give you a bigger a bigger threshold for dealing with stress, and like just tell you, you know what, like that PowerPoint presentation, I'm not going to die. Yeah, I feel a bit of nerves, but like I'm going to be fine.
Exactly.
So yeah,
exactly. I think it's why the generation we just talked about that went to World War II, that saw that as their duty, and then came back and got back to work, did so and didn't whine, didn't complain. They got back and they built this into the most powerful country in the world, but also the most generous country in the world at the same time, which is always something when we talk about having the greatest military, the strongest economy, or whatever it was with that generation, I think we also overlooked that, hey, they also built this into the most compassionate and generous country in the world as well. But similar to coming back from like Ramadi in 2005, 2006, I tend to now compare things to, you know what, no one's, going down, putting an IED outside my front door. I'm not, no one's rolling a grenade in here, that sort of thing. Like, it's okay. Something so anyway, it's just that generation, more of them had a touch point with World War II and had a touch point with death and consequences than the generations that have followed.
And so I think, one of the messages from the book is that I think that to get that, the average person has to engineer challenges into their life, right? So are you going to go outside and do something that scares you? You're like, oh, I couldn't stay outside for more than 2 nights in a row in the backcountry. Like, I could never do that. It's like, well, you also have to realize that, like, we're this 2,000 years ago, that would be your life.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that by sort of engineering these things into our lives, we get more of a buffer zone, and we get the point that you're alluding to, like, hey, I'm not in Ramadi with potentially a grenade outside my door. Like, it helps us appreciate all of the amazing comforts that we do have in life. So in the book, I'm not necessarily saying that all the comforts we have in our life are bad. I am saying that when we overuse them, they have serious consequences, and we need to balance them out by doing things that are uncomfortable, doing things that challenges us, doing things that scare us, because only by that can we really appreciate just how freaking good we have it in the grand scheme of time and space if you're living in the US, right?
Yep. That appreciation, and how that goes hand in hand with gratitude, which also goes hand in hand with mental health and a positive outlook on life. Like, all those things are intertwined, which is why that adversity, I think, is so important. Appreciating these things that we have. I mean, I remember Rogan back in 2006, I think he did a comedy sketch somewhere, and I remember hearing it on the radio, and it was just when planes first got internet. And he was like, I don't think I'd even had been on a plane. So it was very early, whenever the planes first got internet. And he was like, I was on this plane, and the first time, they announced on the PA system that you can now get internet, you can log on. And so the guy next to me in first class, he opens his computer and logs on, and it's working for like a minute. And then it goes down, he slams his computer and is like, oh, this is BS thing. Like, you had this new, and you should be saying, I'm flying in a plane over the ground. Like, it was just that appreciation of certain things. And I've always remembered that. I thought it was pretty
well,
pretty
I
clever.
talk a lot about how, like, I hate flying, right? Because flying is terrible. It's like you're in this cramped seat.
It's unnatural.
Plane's too hot. Coffee's terrible. The entertainment's terrible. Bathroom's too cramped. And, so on the flight up to the Arctic, I'm like, man, this plane ride's awful. Then I go spend a month out there where it's like, you're never warm, right? Anytime you want to do anything, you gotta put in effort. To get water, you got to hike down to a stream and carry it all the way back up. If you want to go to the bathroom, you got to hike out on the tundra and carry the rifle with you because there's bears out there, on and on and on. So when I get back on the plane to come back to Vegas, it's like, what do you think my experience of that plane ride is? Right? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's like, I haven't sat in a soft chair for more than a month. I haven't had warm water, and it's coming out of a freaking faucet at 30,000 feet in the air. Got unlimited access to pretzels, right? There's coffee. I hadn't seen a screen in more than a month. All of a sudden, those movies that I thought were crap, I'm like, man, these should be winning all the Academy Awards. These are amazing, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it is like, we don't really have opportunities to really appreciate what we have as much anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in Alaska a couple months ago and on a moose hunt. And it's so amazing. Once again, there's no digital distractions. I'm out there, whether I'm glassing or I'm back in camp, I was quiet. Oftentimes I was by myself glassing on the other side of a hill from somebody or whatever it was. And I just love that. I love that being alone. I've always loved the being alone. And you talked about that trip with Donnie that you did. So you did the first one for Men's Health magazine, and then you go to get a caribou after caribou for 33 days. Is that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I love that. And you said, Donnie said, as our airplanes get smaller, our adventures get bigger. I love that. Yeah. Donnie's awesome.
He's totally right on that. He's an awesome guy. If people listening haven't heard of him, look him up. He's a great dude.
Yeah. I think it's even DonnieVincent.com, I think, but regardless, just put it in the browser, it'll pop up, and his movies are incredible. The way he portrays the way he carries himself through life is just so admirable, and just such a great guy. But so you now all of a sudden go from, 5 days in the backcountry of Nevada to heading up to the Arctic Circle with Donnie Vincent for 33 days. What did you do to prepare for that?
Well, I mean, a lot is the answer. So I did, having worked at Men's Health, I was relatively fit, but I don't think I was physically prepared for all the carrying. So I did a lot of rucking to prepare, a lot of stuff just to make sure that I didn't blow a joint, right? Like, even just like, I've had bad ankles my entire life from playing basketball. So it's like, I had to make sure those things are solid, because if I roll an ankle out there, like, we got a problem, right? Did a lot of like research on the area, did a lot of research on gear systems, kind of made sure everything was dialed in. I think one of the things that I would have changed in my preparation is that I had been training so much and, trying to eat relatively healthy, that I went in at like $170 and I'm 6'1". And that was I was pretty lean too. I probably should have gained like 10 pounds in fat before I left, because I ended up losing 10 pounds and walking out of there at like 160.
Wow.
Which when, after I killed the caribou, we had to ruck with that thing across the tundra for 5 miles. And the thing was like 110 pounds, which military, I mean, relative to some of the loads you guys carry in the military is like, whatever.
Well, it's a different kind of weight though. Like having that, like a hindquarter or something in your pack, that's not, because the military, or if you're a backpacker or whatever, I mean, you can pack your stuff, you get it all nice and tight, you dial in your system, you know where weight goes where. When you tie that, put this meat in a sack, like on your back, like that's a different kind of weight. Just for whatever reason that is, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's different. And it's even different than taking, a perfectly symmetrical 45-pound plate and putting it in a backpack for training. It's different than taking, and let's say you take 2 of those and put those on your back for training. It's different than putting that same amount of weight in some weird hindquarter and whatever else stuff that you have stuffed in your bag. It's just a different kind of weight. And I don't know what that that means, but it is. That's a truth.
Yeah. I can agree. I mean, I still for training will ruck with pretty heavy, and it definitely does feel heavier. It felt heavier out there. But yeah, a ton of training preparation went into it, but it was awesome too, because it kind of, I think, when you challenge yourself with something big, it gives what you're doing a purpose, right? So a lot of time, I mean, think of something like exercise. It's like most people just kind of do it to go through the motions, right? Whereas if you pick something you're going to do, whether it's like, say you're going to do like, I'm going to do a rim to rim to rim run, or I'm going to go up on this crazy backcountry hunt, or I'm going to do this, Leadville 100, like all of a sudden now your training has purpose and there's like a very specific goal. And that also, applied to me with like what I had to do to get ready intellectually. So it was a lot of like reading and learning. And I found that super rewarding.
And then you also had to wrap your head around something that for most of human history would have been a very natural thing, which is the hunt itself. And I
Right.
think you went up there with a tag, but you still were a little bit uncertain if you were going to either want to or be able to press that trigger when you had a living, breathing animal in your sights. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I honestly didn't know if I was going to hunt, and I wasn't planning on it initially because I'm a journalist, and so we're like, I'm not supposed to get involved in the story. But I honestly think I was just telling myself that because I didn't want to cross that emotional barrier,
But
right?
you've eaten
And
hamburgers before, and you're like there's that whole
eat meat every single day, right? It's like meat just kind of appears. It's a part of life. You just have meat. It's just there. So yeah, I was saying I had thought I didn't want to hunt, and I think I was kind of using the line that, oh, I'm a journalist, I don't participate in the story. And Donnie told me, I think you'll understand why we come out here and do this if you actually hunt. And so I trusted them on that. And we had been, looking for a caribou for a while. We're looking for an older animal. And finally we got in a position, and like I'd been carrying this freaking rifle around the tundra for, weeks or whatever. And even then I'm like, I don't actually have to do this if I don't want to, And we ended up getting in a position where I did this sort of ridge, this like knob thing. We might be in good position. So we kind of book it over and, come down and on the tundra, and we like belly crawl in for hundreds of yards. And he was right. I'm like laying there, I got my eye on the scope, he's in the binoculars, and you just see these antlers appear at the apex of this like knob. It was just like, oh my God, like just amazing animals. And they started coming in. There's probably about 30 of them. And there was one that his antlers were kind of hitching as he walked, and he had a limp, right? So he'd been injured somehow, and he's clearly very old. And so I decided, like, all right, I'm going to do this. And he ended up getting in position. It was kind of crazy because he kept going in and out of the herd. It's hard to keep him in the sight. And but eventually the herd kind of parted, and he was just right there. And I pulled the trigger once, pull it twice. And as I write in the book, it's like the animal goes down, and my initial reaction is not positive. It's like, holy shit, what have you done? Right? Like there's no coming back from this. Like you just killed like a living creature. And I was pretty bent up about that, and especially as we went and sort of came upon it, and just seeing it like lying in the tundra was just like, it was kind of gut wrenching, but what was interesting is that once we started breaking it down, my mind really shifted, because then I could see it, like it started to look like meat, right? It wasn't this animal that was like, Bambi in the Disney show, or like something you see at a petting zoo type of thing, or in the zoo. It was like, this is meat. And so then I had this realization, like, dude, you eat meat like every single day, and never once have you felt a single iota of emotion or thought about the animal, and all that, like anything you're feeling right now. And so that was an eye opener, because it made me not just appreciate that meat so much more, but also all the meat I eat, the food system as a whole, right? Like there's a pretty heavy emotional burden that goes into killing an animal so you can have food, but it's a necessary part of the life cycle. And I think now we are very removed from that form of discomfort, and for good reason. And you look at how our food is presented and talked about in grocery stores, it's like it's presented in such a way that you don't really know that most of it is boneless. We also have euphemistic words for it's, we don't talk about it in terms of like anatomy. We have cuts like, oh, ribeye, right? It's like, well, what's a ribeye? That's not like a muscle, right? It's like it's a different thing. So it was a experience that was heavy, but very necessary, and one that I really appreciate.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking not too long ago. I was talking about my moose hunt. Posted a couple pictures or whatever, and someone jumps on there and says something derogatory, and I never respond to those because I don't want to waste bandwidth on the negative, and you're not gonna. It's just not productive. It's much more productive to have a conversation with someone rather than respond back and forth on essentially a text message that's public. That's just not a good venue or platform for productive, positive discussion. But he said something about hunting, super negative about me or whatever. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. This guy's being excessively mean. And so I clicked on it, and he's like, his first picture is him holding up a fish like this. There's no other hunting pictures, but there's, he's a dead fish in his hand. And I'm like,
right.
Okay, and that's went on, but that stuck with me. I do remember those. Most of the negative ones like hit me, and then I don't think about them anymore. You want to respond, but you don't. But then like a day later, I've totally forgotten about it. But that one was just so ridiculous. Like, you're holding up a dead animal, and then you said something about, anyway. Regardless,
no, I mean, I think that people are very disconnected, and we eat so much meat now in the grand scheme of history. It's like meat used to be really scarce. And like, I mean, this is why when we would hunt in the past, it was like, we'd have a massive celebration over getting that meat because it was hard to come by. And now it's just like triple burgers for, $4 from any drive-through, which, look, I'm not saying that's a bad problem to have in the grand scheme of history. Like, for nearly all of life, it was a struggle to get enough calories, to get enough nutrients. This is a good problem to have. But at the same time, it is a problem where now we have so much of it that it's causing health problems, but also just like the disconnect there, I think, has some repercussions that aren't good.
And we waste a lot too. We waste a ton of meat. And I think a lot of that comes from not having to put in the work to get it, other than stopping by the grocery stores. You're throwing in Cheetos and Fruit Loops and whatever else, and then grabbing a couple, steaks that are wrapped in cellophane. They're super clean, and you're just tossing it in the cart and grabbing your kid and whatever else. Like, you don't have that appreciation for it because you haven't put in the work. Okay, maybe you've worked for the money to buy that, but there's that disconnect between that living, breathing animal that you put down, that you field dress, that you butcher, that you carry out, that you then put in your freezer, and then that you eat with your family and provided them sustenance. If we don't do that, then we waste a ton. I think there was a study a few years ago about just how much meat we waste in the United States. And when you're eating,
about a third of the calories we produce as a country get wasted.
It's incredible.
So, which is crazy. And I know for me, after hunting, like, I never waste meat anymore.
That's right.
Like, ever.
That's
like,
right.
It'll be, if I have meat that's going to go bad, it's like, okay, for breakfast, it looks like we're having some random thing you would never normally eat for breakfast or whatever it is, So, and I think that's a good thing. And I think, for me, at least, I hope that, people can adopt that without having to hunt. Cause I know that there's a big barrier to entry in the sport, and it can be expensive. And, but I think for me, like, just having that experience really cemented it for me.
Yeah. And it's, there can be barriers. I think a lot of it depends on where you live. If you're obviously more, if you're in the middle of a big city and don't know anyone that hunts and have to leave that city to go someplace to hunt, figure out the laws and regulations around that. It can be a little bit daunting, rather than, hey, if you're in the country and you know someone that goes out and hunts and they've given you meat before and you're interested in it, it's just a lot. And you can drive a half hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is. It's a lot different than having to board a plane out of New York City and fly someplace and figure all that out. There's less hoops to jump through if you're already essentially in the location that you're going to hunt.
And I have a friend who's a food writer. She writes about agriculture. Her name's Tamar Haspel. She's one of the best food writers going now, in my opinion. And she makes the argument that kids as a field trip should be taken to a slaughterhouse to see what that's like. I mean, like, schools should be like doing this thing, because it would give a lot more appreciation, I think.
Yeah. The people that are anti-hunting, and I think you talk about this in the book, about people in large cities that have the most disconnect are also those who are typically the most adamantly against people that go out and hunt and put their own food on the table for whatever reason, in between bites of a cheeseburger or whatever else. So, and that's a disconnect for our country. That's a divisive point amongst many, many others that we have to contend with as a nation. When you have big population centers that are dictating to someone in the country that they can't go out and take a deer and put it on the family's table because they're against it because of maybe a moral vanity. They don't even know. Anyway,
Yeah,
and a
I'm
lot of
with
this
you.
could be alleviated, I think, through reading. Again, the study of history, appreciating how we got to this point when you could live in a large city and go down and have a tea and talk to your friend and whatever else. Like, that wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
A very small part of human history that you could outsource your protection through a police force or a military and outsource how you fed yourself and your family. That's a tiny sliver of human history.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but you have a very cool quote in here. And you talk about uh, Edward Abbey and Thoreau here, and you say when you're talking about hunting, Thoreau was also aware of the great responsibility embedded in hunting. Again, in Walden, he wrote that it must be done in earnest. He gave no definition of in earnest, but Edward Abbey later interpreted Thoreau's in earnest to mean done in a spirit of respect, reverence, and gratitude. And I love that because it doesn't just apply to hunting. I think it can apply to quite a few different things in life. But I think if all hunters or those that are thinking about going afield look at hunting in those terms and as the way to go about doing it and taking a life, in earnest is a really good way to frame it.
Yeah. Just like living life in general, you know,
Exactly.
do it
Exactly.
with respect, do it with gratitude. I mean, that's the way.
And yeah, and you talk about coming home, like we just talked about, and having that warm water and having that soft bed and appreciating it rather than having it just be these things that are always there and always going to be there. Maybe, maybe not. And that's where that dealing with adversity throughout your life comes into play. Um, and you also talk about something in here. And am I saying it right? Biophilia hypothesis. Is that right? By
Yeah.
biologist
Hmm.
E.O. Wilson. And he talks about our ingrained call to be in nature. And that's one of the things that gives me hope for the future because we have these things that are a natural part of us. And a lot of it draws us back to being alone for a little bit each day, away from these devices to think through issues and problems, just daydream for general mental health. And you talk about something that I read about somewhere not too long ago, the forest bathing in Japan, going out for 15 minutes a day, just being alone. I mean, how many people just are alone without their device for 15 minutes a day?
It's so easy and not many people do. And that's
Not
because
many
it's
people.
uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Again, it's like that people get FOMO when they get away from their phone. And like, you
Seriously.
know, I get it. There's evolutionary reasons for all this. Like the whole, you know, the theme of the book as I talk about is that, you know, for nearly all of time, doing the next most comfortable thing that kept us alive, right? Our drive to always be comfortable, it told us don't move any more than you have to because calories are at a premium and we don't want to
Mm-hmm.
starve to death because you got like a running hobby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if food was around, it told us to eat as much of it as possible because we may go through a 24-hour stint where there wasn't food around, right? You want to put on fat so you can survive. Told us to focus on any negative attention that came our way. So this made sense because it was often a survival threat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about what does the media tend to run? It tends to run stories about negative stuff and it captures our attention, even though the world over time is getting better. Right. And so on and on and on. So this drive that we always have to be comfortable, it no longer serves us in a lot of ways. So it's figuring out. So in the book, really, you know, the thesis is like, here are these fundamental forms of discomfort that we evolved facing that we no longer do. And here are the repercussions of that. And here's how you can weave discomfort back into your life.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic book, and I think I'm giving this after we do this podcast. I'm going to give it to my daughter as well because it's so great for kids to read these things and
I
kind
love
of to
that.
normalize some discomfort and the importance of being able to deal with failure and take those hits and keep moving forward because that's life. But you also have this quote from John Muir, who in 1901 said. Nerve shaken, over civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home. That wilderness is a necessary and that mountain parks and reservations are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating rivers, but as fountains of life. So true. And when we talked about Outward Bound earlier, and you talk about Outward Bound in the book a little bit, but the history of Outward Bound is fascinating. I don't think they talk about it too much these days, but it's connected to the lead up and into World War II, where we had sailors in the North Atlantic getting torpedoed, and they found that a lot of these older ones were the ones that were surviving. And the ones that were younger and fitter, who had all this reason to live, were tended to be the ones that were succumbing to this cold and these situations. And they thought, whoa, maybe these older people are the ones that have faced adversity in life and can deal with these situations. That was one of the main reasons that Outward Bound was started
That's
in
crazy.
the UK. Yeah, it has a martial beginning.
I love it.
They definitely don't talk about too much anymore, interestingly enough. And you talk about nutrition in this book as well, and you did a lot of research into that. What did you learn about the importance of being hungry or nutrition in general? And there's another great quote in here. You say, Dr. Jason Fung, who told you, think about a hungry wolf versus a lion who just ate. Which one is more focused?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, so in the book, I argue that, we're not really ever hungry for extended periods of time anymore. And you look at why people eat now, like 80% of the time, it's for a reason other than true physiological hunger. And that 80% tracks about with the percentage of people in the US who are either overweight or obese, right? So food has essentially become kind of a widget. We eat because we're stressed. We eat because we got nothing to do. We eat because it's a certain time on the clock. And we're also eating food that is inherently comfort food.
Yeah.
Right? It's packed with calories and tastes great, textures, all this kind of stuff. But we know that the body tends to, when you go through extended periods of hunger, it doesn't like burn. It needs to essentially burn itself for fuel, keep you alive, right? And it doesn't burn its finest cells, right? It tends to cull the herd. It picks like cells that are dying, that are damaged, that aren't as useful. And that seems to have some health benefits because you're sort of like your body's taking out the trash. So I talk a lot about how, we have this diet culture nowadays where there's like 50 million diets you can try, and they all have, some food in them that's, this is the reason you're fat, and this food is going to be your savior. But when you look at it, it's like they all work by the same mechanism. You have to eat less than you burn, right? And in doing that, you're going to be hungry. That is why people fail on diets. It's because they get to a certain point where their body starts to go, I don't think we should be losing weight. Because in the past, losing weight was bad, right? It was bad for your survival. So your body sort of ramps up its hunger signals, and it has all these amazing mechanisms that used to keep us alive in the past. But now when we try and lose weight, it doesn't serve us. So really the key to losing weight is starting to become comfortable with the discomfort of hunger. Like just realizing you're going to have to go through it, but you're going to come out on the other end. Okay. And also in doing that, your body, if you think about it in the past, like with that quote, you don't actually shut down and slow down when you're hungry because like you needed the extra boost of energy in the past and that focus. So you can actually use that in a work capacity setting. Like a lot of people who will, not eat breakfast, they tend to be more focused up until lunch than people who eat a big breakfast and then go right into work.
Oh, interesting. Maybe I should give that sometimes I do that, but it's not because I'm trying to. It's just because there's so much to do. I just grab coffee and I'm just going to sit down just do this thing for 10 minutes and I'm going to go make a couple eggs or whatever. And then that 2 minutes or 10 minutes turns into 2 hours or 3 hours. I'm like, oh man, I haven't eaten. And then it becomes a brunch. That's just how it goes. And we talked about it a little bit, but that city country gap that exists in the country. And you talk about a little bit of how that might not be necessarily a very good thing for us as a nation.
Yeah. You look at the research on, so it goes back to that 150 number we were talking about. And this research basically found that the lower the population density of a place, the more likely people are to be happy. So you look at depression rates, and the most depressed people tend to be in the most densely populated cities. Like they did this analysis of 318 cities in the US, and New York was dead last because it's the most population dense. And it seems that the human brain really likes to not be, packed with people and buildings and, pavement and all this kind of stuff. We like fewer interactions with people, but more genuine interactions, I would say, right? we also know that people do well when they're exposed to nature, and there's different like levels and times of nature that lead to different benefits in the human brain. And so I think that's kind of a long way of saying the takeaway is, spend more time outside with a couple people you love, and even alone.
The alone part is so key, being comfortable being alone. It was something that was just natural for me, but for our kids growing up with these digital distractions, they're never really alone. Like I was alone reading books in my room, or going outside, reading a book outside. Like I was alone, but I was learning, and I was having these experiences through the pages of a good book. So yeah, that's what I'd encourage everybody to do. I try to do it as often as I possibly can. Just encourage people to put those devices aside and get into the pages of a good book.
Yeah.
It will be time well spent, for sure.
Yeah. And you hear a lot of, stuff now about how loneliness is so bad for us. That is true. But there is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is, I want to be around people, but I can't be around anyone. Like I don't have any friends. I don't have any family, whatever. Solitude is selecting to have time alone for yourself, to just sort of think about things, to sort of learn more about yourself, to have some time to just like relax and like not have all this outward stimulation. And so, I think we do need a lot more time in solitude, and to leverage that. And you look at a lot of, some of the best thinkers in history, like Abraham Lincoln, like Steve Jobs, like on and on and on. All these people would leverage these extended times in solitude to do a lot of work, to sort of do a lot of thinking, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I've never felt lonely being alone, if that makes sense. I think there are probably a lot of lonely people living in big cities where they have somebody very close by, even if it's across a wall in an apartment or whatever it might be. Or maybe they're out on the street surrounded by thousands of people and they still feel lonely. So I think that's definitely a difference, feeling lonely, having that be a negative thing, than being alone and appreciating that time to think. Yeah. And there's also a part of your book, in part 4 of your book, it's subtitled, Think About Your Death Every Day, which is a very stoic thing to do. And for whatever reason, I've thought about death a lot over the course of my life. But talk about what you learned about death and the importance of thinking about death and framing your life and your path forward.
Yeah. So after killing the caribou, it just got me thinking about the life cycle, and how for one thing to live on, another has to die. And, I'm not excluded from that.
Yeah.
None of us are. And it sort of got me thinking about how in the US, like we don't really think about death or face death. After someone dies, we make them look as alive as possible. And then we have a funeral, and we, put them in the ground. And then we're told to stay busy, take our mind off it. Even our food system, as we've talked about, doesn't remind us that our meat came from a living animal. And so I wanted to know how other cultures maybe think about it. And so I traveled to Bhutan, which is right near Nepal, and death is woven into the culture there. So funerals, for example, are like this 21-day event. A lot of their art and cultural stuff centers around death. There's even these, like, after someone dies, they're cremated, and their ashes are mixed with this clay, and they're formed in these little pyramids. And pyramids are everywhere, all over the country. Like windowsills, you come around a bend in the road, there's a bunch of these pyramids. And the citizens are instructed to think about death at least once a day. And the reason for this is because they are a Buddhist nation, and they've tended to take the idea of impermanence in Buddhism kind of to a larger level. And so I traveled there, and I met with a guy who's really high up in the Buddhist faith. He's a Kempo, and I mean, he's, I'm like this gangly Western writer, and we have to take this car up this like mountain cliff road to this monastery that's hanging off a cliff. And this guy's in this like shack, and there's no like running water, electricity. And I go in, and he's like in his orange robes, like meditating to the Buddha. And it was just like, holy hell, this is a trip, But I talked to him for a long time, and he sort of explained it like this. Pretend you're walking on a trail. Okay. And at the end of this trail is a cliff. Well, the catch is that the cliff is death. And right now we are all walking on that trail, right? It's like, well, don't you don't you want to know that there's a cliff at the end of this trail? Right. In the US, you guys don't want to know about the cliff, but in Bhutan, we want to know about the cliff because that changes how we're going to walk the trail, what we're going to pay attention to, the conversations we're going to have with the people that were on the trail. So he says that, by considering your own death, your own impermanence, it can change your behavior. Because if you realize this ride is going to end, you're probably going to enjoy it. You're probably going to prioritize different things, right? You may prioritize more family time or more experiences over, buying that new car or that new watch you really want. And when they do research in the US about this, they find that people who think about their death tend to end up being happier. So it changes your behavior in such a way that people end up happier. And so this is one of those strange findings where you hear about it at first and it sounds like this kind of mystical thing that's like, embedded in this ancient religion, and then gets followed up by research in the US. And you're like, oh yeah, the ancients had it right the whole time.
Yeah, no, and it wasn't just that culture either. It's been other cultures throughout time as well. Yeah, and that's what you write here. This Eastern Washington University study, which is tend to recognize that what might be and become more grateful for the life that they're experiencing in thinking about death on a daily basis. I mean, obviously you don't want to be all consuming, but it will change the decisions that you make, what you prioritize, which is beneficial to everyone around you, not just yourself, to your circle. And you talk about how we do measure things probably by money rather than and I think about this a lot, and I thought about when I was reading your book as well, in how, like for me, we have a special needs middle child, which means that I need to provide for him for a lifetime of full-time care. So it's about more than just me. It's about more than just getting our children to age 18. So there is this financial component that is a driver for sure. But measuring things by money, I think, is different. And the way I measure things these days is about how present I am with the ones that I love, being present with them when I am physically present with them, which as a writer is oftentimes difficult because you're solving a problem that on the written page that you were trying to figure out a couple hours earlier, and you're with your family, but you're really solving this problem because things are sinking in because you've now given it a couple hours to soak in or whatever it might be. So I really have to make a conscious effort to put that stuff aside and be present rather than working on that something that because it's a year-long process to write, as one of these a book or more, depending on what you're.
Yeah, man, it's fun to talk to you because we suffer from the same abnormalities of being a writer.
Yeah, and I think that's why so many of them, over time when you study some of these guys, they can go a little crazy and hit the bottle a little hard or whatever it might be, because they're solving those problems on the written page, even though they're not in front of that typewriter or they're not with pen in hand, but they're still thinking about it. Maybe I don't know. There's a lot to it, so I have to, at least I can recognize it and take active steps to correct some of my behaviors. But you also read a book called The Fine Art of Living and Manifesting a Peaceful Death as part of your research, and then there's the Spenton book of Living and Dying. And part of that talks about a Western checklist living that consists of cramming our lives with compulsive activity so that there's no time at all to confront the real issues, which I think is something that is very detrimental to our society going forward, because we're certainly not getting less dependent on all these devices that we've talked about. It's becoming even more and more a part of our lives. So it's going to take people recognizing that this might not be healthy for them personally, but also for society as a whole, and taking active steps to these devices that are addictive and are necessary for a lot of our businesses now as well. So there's all these different facets to it. So it's certainly not an easy thing. But confronting the real issues is what I took away from that. So in writing about that chapter and about death and taking this trip that you took and meeting these people and reading these different books, how did that affect how you're living your life now?
I mean, I would say for one, I'm way more grateful for everything we have. I think it's really easy to take how amazing life is for granted. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just, this is how it is. But it's like by diving into the research and going on all these crazy travels for this book, it's just like, oh my God, like life today is amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we miss sight of that. So there's a ton of gratitude that I have now. I also do things as simple as like, I take a 20-minute walk outside every day without my cell phone, because it's an amazing period to think and just be completely removed, but also have some time outside, which, I talk about in the book, a lot of the research around why that's so great and like these specific doses of time you need in nature. I've changed how I approach exercise too. I write in the book a lot about rucking and how the human body really evolved to carry weight, right? We're only good at two things as animals: running long distances slowly in the heat and carrying weight. We're the only animals that can really carry weight. And that seems to be uniquely good for us. So that, ton more time outside, try and just take on challenges, and like even just deferring to like, don't always do the next easy thing. As much as our lizard brains are like, do the comfortable thing, do the easy thing. Like, no, that's not where you're going to get a payoff and long-term fulfillment. And man, I could go on, but those are a few things.
Yeah, no, it's all so fantastic. And the fitness side, especially when you're talking about the weight that we carry, you talk about the military and how that's evolved over time, how much weight we carry. And it's interesting in Iraq and Afghanistan, we'd see the enemy. Obviously, they're not carrying as much weight as we are. They don't have to have these satellite radios that are built around batteries that were probably also the same batteries used in Vietnam, even though we've had all these technological advances over the years. And why is that? Whose district makes the battery? Like, there's all these things to think about that are weighing us down. I think we're probably better at it now, but you're right about this too. You say, and I love this sentence here. You say at the tip, and it's from someone that you interview. It says, at the tip of the spear in the U.S., we have the fittest soldiers who ever existed. At the opposite end, we have the most unfit citizenry. And he said that is to our detriment and to the detriment of America. And once again, there's that city country divide. There's that the divide between people who appreciate where their meat comes from and those who sometimes take active steps to keep them from doing that. So the exercise and the fitness part of all this was fascinating as well. Particularly, there's a book over on the shelf over there, something about, it's a couple rows back, about the mobility of a nation, I think is part of the title. And how much, and I forget the exact SLA Marshall maybe, but anyway, it's how important it is to be able to carry some weight, but also to be able to move effectively and efficiently with that weight, which is kind of what a lot of the fitness programs that we all gravitated towards really after 9/11 in particular, rather than just going into the gym and trying to look like some of the 80s action heroes. It became a little different when when there was a lot more on the line. But can you talk about the AMA, the AMA? Am I saying that right? The Sea Women of Japan, them Sherpas, and then this culture in Iceland. Like, what did you learn from those different subsets of cultures and people?
Yeah. So this section of the book, I kind of look at like, what are some cultures that have these practices that are seemingly, really uncomfortable, and what has that done for them? So with the AMA, this is a group of women who live on the coast of Japan and Korea. And for their living, they dive into the ocean and they will, search for food, et cetera, at the bottom of the ocean. So they'll do dives that are, I think, as deep as like 20 feet or whatever. But in the winter, the ocean is like really cold, like really cold. And they spend their days in it, right? Like, they'll dive down and they'll spend 5, 10, 15 minutes in it, come up in the boat, warm up, and they're just doing this all day. And so, there's that kind of cliche that your grandma told you, like, if you get cold, you're going to catch a cold. Well, it turns out that's not the case. So this is research done, which is fascinating, in the 60s. And the reason they started doing this research was actually to learn information about how to train SEAL divers. And so they basically found that these women had lower rates of disease, like every single marker they studied, whether that was like body fat content, they had higher fitness, they were less likely to catch a cold, they had just a lot more robust systems compared to the people who didn't expose themselves in the cold in their same village, who lived the exact same lifestyle, except for they didn't ever get cold, right? And so I think that what this told us is that, as a sort of backup, is that your body evolved all these amazing mechanisms to regulate your internal temperature. When you're too hot, certain things kick on to cool you down. When you're too cold, certain things kick on to warm you up. And Nowadays, the average person spends 93% of their time indoors at 72 degrees. So these systems never really get activated, right? And so a lot of the research is indicating that spending time in cold, getting your body really heated up, can be uniquely good for us, and sort of this new world of health that we haven't necessarily, that we're just kind of learning about, but we know can be beneficial. With the Sherpa, so these guys are fascinating because, so this is a group of people in Nepal, and they tend to, their jobs as a career, they tend to be mountain porters. So they will, carry people's stuff up when they try to summit Everest or whatever. And these guys are naturally just like really, really good up there. Like they're just like all the best climbers are Sherpas. And what scientists have found is that they have this gene. And what's paradoxical about these people is that they're amazing climbers at altitude, like 20,000 feet or above, 18,000 feet or above. And so you would think that like, oh, their endurance must be off the chart if you put them in a marathon. And like, I think people were actually like, yeah, we should get Sherpas into marathoning because they'll probably kill it. Well, it turns out they're basically average. And what they found is they have this crazy gene that once they get above a certain altitude, this gene starts to express itself, and it lets them use oxygen a lot more efficiently. So it's almost like the average person goes into altitude and we are trying to suck down oxygen. We can't use it well. What happens with them is they get up there and their body converts this thing that uses what little oxygen they have a lot more efficiently. It's like a flower that gets exposed to the sun and it sort of blooms. Now researchers are doing some work on that gene to see if we can use it, maybe for some sort of pill or something for humans in the future to help us use oxygen more efficiently. But then the Iceland research is fascinating because the men in Iceland live longer than any other men on Earth. And the short answer of why they think this is that Iceland was settled by Vikings only about 1,000 years ago. So it was this totally desolate, terrible island to live on because it's terrible. It's like flat. It's freezing cold. There's all these winds. Like no one would ever want to live there, and nothing did until these Vikings came along. They swung by Ireland. They kidnapped all these women. They go settle Iceland, and they quickly find it's terrible to live there. Right. So the population, it like doesn't grow for like hundreds and hundreds of years. As Europe has grown tenfold, Iceland is still at the same population it had been at only until about the last 100, 200 years. And what's happened over time, they think, is that because it was so uncomfortable to live there, everything took work, it was always too cold, just really rough lifestyle. It almost like culled the herd. And what ended up happening is the people who were sort of survivors and a little bit tougher than everyone else, those people managed to live on and spread their genes, while people who weren't quite as tough perished. So they had one of the highest infant mortality rates ever recorded by science. It was like 600 something deaths per whatever births, which is just insane. But over time, it's led to this population that's a lot more robust and seemingly has led them to live longer.
No kidding. Yeah, I want to spend some more time in Iceland. I've landed there twice to refuel emergency landing or something. But in high school, I wanted to circumnavigate it in a kayak. That was always something I wanted to do. Yeah, so it's still on my list. My wife rolls her eyes every time I mention it. Because I do mention it maybe once a year or so, maybe twice. For whatever reason, that was just something I wanted to do. So maybe I'll get to it at some point. But going back to hunting really quick, are you going to be hunting again? Is it something that you want to do to continue to put food in your freezer, or you want to explore those feelings and emotions behind it a little more, or is it to continue to appreciate where things come from, or what's your relationship going forward with that draw of the hunt, essentially?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep hunting. I mean, I hunted this fall in Utah for elk, and it was, it's just one of those things where I'm like, I definitely want this to be a part of my life moving forward, just for the experience of that extended time in nature, but also that reminder of, the meat that we eat comes with a heavy burden. And so like to be able to experience that, I think is an important thing for me as a human, and to be able to fill my freezer with like just amazing meat and have that all year round to share with family and friends, I think is pretty rewarding. So I'm going to definitely keep that behavior up.
Yeah. And putting that hind quarter on your back or whatever it is and hiking out of a canyon, man, that's like we talked about earlier, that's some different kind of weight. And that's
Yeah.
You'll remember those. You'll remember hiking that meet out. That's for sure. I got an elk in the backcountry in New Mexico years ago, and 100 pounds, 110, 115. Where we loaded it up with to hike down to a place. It was like a mile, maybe a mile and a half or something like that. But multiple trips back and forth, public land. It ended up, it was a really old bull. But I remember that. Like I remember hiking out with that thing the same way I remember some experiences in buds in SEAL training, like being there on the beach on the verge of hypothermia, getting yelled at, people quitting in droves. Like I put those in the same category in my mind. Like I distinctly remember both of those experiences as being, not quite so comfortable. And speaking of SEAL training really quick, Hell Week, we get 80% of our attrition throughout the whole thing, but most of it occurs during Hell Week. And a lot of that is because of the cold. And because people's minds are in those first few hours, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be freezing on the verge of hypothermia for the next 5 days. I don't think I can do this. I'm going to be warm. And it's very easy to be warm again. All you have to do is go ring this bell we put in a trailer hitch now. It used to be in front of the first phase classroom, but for Hell Week, it's never going to leave your sight. It's going to always be there in this trailer hitch thing that we have set up. So when you're freezing on the beach or no matter where you are, it's right there, like 20 yards away. And all you got to do is ring that 3 times and okay, bam, there you go. You get some hot chocolate, you get a little coffee, some donuts, and you're comfortable again.
Yeah.
So we make it very easy to opt out. And a lot of people do because of that cold. And I think because they haven't been tested up to that point. It's been an idea. It's been this thing, hey, I'm going to test myself here in Hell Week. But along the way, they haven't been uncomfortable enough to realize, oh, you know what? I can keep moving forward here. I can be a little cold for a while. That's fine. And look what these other people did by reading these other stories. Look what these guys did in World War II. Look what happened to these people during our Revolutionary War. Look at no matter what it is, like people have faced adversity time and time again throughout the course of human history. And you know what? I'm going to be okay here. I'm going to shiver a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to do this. But that being cold part I think being cold is probably the most uncomfortable that one can be. Ish.
Sucks.
Yeah. And that's why I see guys getting in these ice baths and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, like then the health benefits people are talking about with these ice baths and then going into the dry saunas you're supposed to do now. Is that right? The dry heat and then go into
I think a lot of people are doing
something.
That. Yeah.
And all that seems to change, which is why I'm like, don't have an ice bath yet. It's because I remember in high school, all the girls coming into the cafeteria and eating bagels and cream cheese, because back then there was, for whatever reason, that was like something healthy to eat. And so it's always stuck with, or a carbo load, we're going to have all this pasta, work out and then we're going to have pasta. And maybe there were some other things we could have done that would have been a little better for what we were trying to achieve. So I'm always a bit skeptical of all these things that I'm told to do for my health.
Well, I tend to think about that as like, what did our natural environment used to show us naturally, right? We were never in a room that was 180 degrees. So I live in Las Vegas. I will still go work out when it's 115 outside. Like, I'm not going to let that slow me down. I'll also, on the rare day it's like in the 30s, I'm still going to go outside and work out then too. But I don't feel like I necessarily have to take a cold plunge, like an ice plunge all the time. It just, I'm kind of with you where I'm like a little bit skeptical, but I know there's benefits from the research I've done, but I don't think there's anything that suggests there's like these crazy benefits to going at these new extremes we can create with machines. So
that makes me feel so much better that you just said that, because
you get a free pass.
I've been like, oh man, do I need to get one of these ice tubs now and put it outside? And then you put it on Instagram or whatever. Like, I'm not so thrilled about doing that. I think it's more fitness today is more about being able to go out and do these hunts and have these experiences and then keep up with my kids, be able to be healthy enough and mobile enough to be able to keep up with them and then to deal with life as situations get thrown at me that I need to adapt to. So it's really all about that.
You live in Park City, like you're going to get plenty cold taking the chair up to, the top of Jupiter.
There you go. You know it out here.
Yeah. So I think that there's your pass right there.
Awesome. So cool. And thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I've been looking forward to this for the longest time. So thank you so much for doing this. But quickly before we go, how long did it take you from inception? Not just the idea, but like the sitting down, okay, I'm starting to write, to write this book. And then what did you change in your life? We've touched on it a tiny bit, but, what did you change in your life, holistically after going through the entire experience of researching and writing this book?
it probably took me from when the book actually got commissioned to when I turned it into my editor was probably 15 months, I would say. And what I've changed is, I mean, I think honestly, the change most for me has been psychological. I think by going into Alaska for, more than a month and sort of braving that wilderness, both literally and metaphorically, I just have like a gear that I didn't really realize was there. And just my tolerance is just way higher than it was for everything, right? Like stress tolerance, better perspective on life. Like I just, if you were like, hey, by the way, after this podcast, the catch is like, you got to go run 40 miles right now after this, I would be like, all right, well, that doesn't sound fun, but yeah, I can do that. I kind of just have this like gear now where I'm just like, yeah, I can do that. No big deal. And I think that that's pretty valuable. So I'd say that's the number one thing besides, a million different lifestyle changes, which I kind of allude to in the book. So
yeah, having that perspective and be able to put things in relative terms, I found is very helpful.
Yeah, dude, like after your experience in the SEALs, you probably come back into like whatever you could face in Park City. It's just going to be like, yeah, I got this. Like, come on,
Yeah. And that the danger of that and not being aware of it is that when you are dealing with someone who has an event that they believe is traumatic, for them, it is. Like that talking to the boss and messing it up or doing the presentation, like for them, it's equating to that death 300, 400, 500 years ago, whatever it might be. So instead of belittling that or it's recognizing that, hey, they're equating this to the same types of things years ago, or in your personal experience, that might actually have been death. And that gives you a way to approach and deal with them in their situation. So it gives you a little empathy, I guess, for dealing with others rather than just like putting them in a category that you don't want to deal with, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like, talking to that, like, let's go try some stuff outside. Like, cause that I think will help, that can help reframe it for people. But yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. I think we'd be a better country for sure. If people would take a breath for a second, put the phones down and appreciate all the things that we do have. And then where some of these things came from, like the food in the grocery store. But what is next for you before I let you go? You're still teaching at UNLV, and do you have another book that you're interested in writing, or how are you prioritizing all these different experiences that you've had and things you might want to explore in a future book? And how are you racking and stacking those to determine what's next?
Yeah, I'm still at UNLV, which I love because it makes me think through my process, and just get questions from kids. And it's like, oh man, I never thought about why I did that this way. Keeps me up on my pop culture on that kind of stuff too. And I got another book I'm working on right now too. So I spent the summer, I was in the Amazon for a while, took this like canoe way deep, and have a bunch of other travels lined up for that book. So chipping away at that, the process, what that's like. So it's both equally maddening and rewarding. So I'm having fun with that. And yeah, that's what's on the horizon.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear there's another book in the works, because when I talk to somebody that has a fantastic book out and they haven't started the next one, when I'm talking to them, I'm like, dang it, what? Or there was a space between one book that I enjoyed and the next one, if it's been like 5 years or something. And I'm like, do I have to wait another 5 before this person does something again? So I'm glad to hear that you have something else in the works. And I'm super excited that it's down on the Amazon, because that's an area that I'd love to go explore someday, where I haven't really been yet. So I'm looking forward to reading that when it comes out.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm glad you liked this one. Hopefully I can deliver on the next one too.
Awesome. I'm sure you will. And thank you so much. And now that we've done the podcast, I'm going to give this to my daughter to read.
I love that.
Then our other kids, when they get old enough to be able to read it. So that is awesome. So thank you so much for writing this. It's a super valuable book for everyone to read, particularly right now in this stage that we're at in the course of human evolution, and particularly in this country dealing with what we're dealing with. So thank you so much for writing it. And man, thanks so much for taking the time today. I sure appreciate it.
That was a blast, man. It was so fun to talk to another writer. We can commiserate about all the side effects of the job. Oh, yeah. So I love the work you're doing, the message you're putting out. So it was a real honor. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thanks so much. And we'll talk about the Amazon next time.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Welcome to the gear highlight portion of the Danger Close podcast. I was just talking with Michael Easter, my guest who wrote the book, The Comfort Crisis, about the importance of being uncomfortable, the importance of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, as we would say in the SEAL teams. And there was an entire generation, well, most generations up to today, had to be comfortable being uncomfortable. They had to face adversity. They had to take an active role in putting food on the table through hunting. They had to defend their family, defend the tribe. They couldn't outsource those sorts of things. And life was tough at a basic level, meaning food and defense for the most part. But I just got back from the 80th anniversary commemoration events at Pearl Harbor. And I went out there with the Best Defense Foundation. You might have heard my podcast with Donnie Edwards, former NFL superstar. And he started the Best Defense Foundation with his wife, Catherine. And they take World War II veterans, primarily now anyway, back to the battlefields on which they fought, giving them a chance to make peace with what happened back there, say goodbye to their friends who didn't make it and those that they've lost in the intervening years. It's an amazing organization. So check out thebestdefensefoundation.org. But I took my daughter on this trip. So we were out there in Pearl Harbor for a week. My daughter is 16 and she got to spend almost every single second of every single day, because it was so busy out there volunteering, getting these World War II veterans to and from the different events, getting them in their wheelchairs, getting them out of their wheelchairs, onto the buses, off the buses, to their seat at the event ceremony, that sort of a thing for an entire week. And she got to hear their stories about growing up during the Depression, how their family put food on the table, where they were on December 7th, 1941. Some were actually in Pearl Harbor. Others heard about it on the radio and joined up to defend the nation, and then went to war, and then came home and built the nation that we have today. Not only the most powerful nation on earth, but the most generous. We often overlook that as well. But in this gear highlight portion, we had some amazing organizations that helped make all that possible. And Maui Brewing Company, along with Chula Vista Brewery in San Diego, they created this 80th anniversary Day of Infamy Ale. And it is awesome. It is so good. I might have liberated a few. I've had a couple to drink as well. But these are awesome. And this benefits the Best Defense Foundation. So all the guys at Maui Brewing Co. and everybody at Chula Vista Brewery were so awesome. And they made quite a beer. So this is awesome. So track it down, get it, and know that the proceeds go to an amazing organization. So thank you guys. This is so good. Sincerely appreciated. Being out there, I got to meet a guy named Jack Holder. Now, Jack Holder, he wrote a book not too long ago to chronicle some of his experiences, but he was at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He was one of the first people to get shot at, watched the planes as they banked into Pearl Harbor and dropped the torpedoes. And he gave me this coin. Jack Holder, amazing guy. But he went on to be a pilot and sunk a Japanese submarine, and then went over to the Atlantic and to the English Channel and served flying out of the UK. And he sunk a German submarine. He also in the Pacific helped sink a carrier, a Japanese carrier. Amazing. I mean, that's back when things were tough. But highly recommend picking up the book, Fear, Adrenaline, and Excitement, the Jack Holder story, so we don't forget what this generation did for us to give us these freedoms, options, and opportunities that we have today. Best Defense Foundation right there. This coin commemorates the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Check out the Best Defense Foundation for sure. And how did we get out there? American Airlines hooked it up with a flight. So we had this flight. Everybody working the flight, from the pilots, crew, everybody were volunteers. And they weren't taking leave or anything like that. They volunteered for this flight to and from Hawaii. And they have a military division at American Airlines. It was pretty cool. The flight out there was pretty special. Bottle Breacher created these bottle breachers specifically for the event as well. My buddy Eli Crane over there at Bottle Breacher, and Born Primitive, their athletic line, they sponsored, and so did 9 Line, apparel right there. They did a ton as well. But yeah, it was absolutely incredible. This was the program for the 80th anniversary commemoration events, and Best Defense Foundation right here. This has the bios on the 63 World War II veterans that we took out there. So reading about what these guys did. And when I say guys, I mean women as well, because we had four women as part of the group, and just incredible. Puts things in perspective, and it's always helpful, I think, to keep things in relative terms when we're thinking about adversity and what we're going through, because these people stepped up to give us this freedom, and we need to be good inheritors of that freedom. All right, that's it. So pick up the book, Bottle Breacher, Maui Brew Co., Chula Vista Brewery, 9 Line, Born Primitive, American Airlines. Thank you guys so much. Best Defense Foundation. What you're doing for these veterans is, I guess you have to really experience it to understand, but giving them closure and doing this for that generation is, it's incredible, very special. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for tuning into the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by 6 Hour. Find out more about Michael Easter, go to his website, which is Easter Michael. But if you put Michael Easter into your web browser, it'll just pop up. But EasterMichael.com. You can link to his Instagram from there and follow along with everything that he has going on. His book, The Comfort Crisis, is on shelves now, available anywhere books are sold, and I highly recommend picking it up. You can follow me on officialjackcarr.com and link to Jack Carr USA on the socials from there. You can go to jackcarrusa.com for the merch. And my next book, In the Blood, is coming May 2022 and available for pre-order now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Sincerely appreciated. And until the next time, take care, stay safe, be strong, keep fighting.